I just want to test my mic real quick. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Oh, very sensitive button.
Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. Is there anybody that has emailed that? Is Amanda coming or did she email? Perfect. Will we see the Zoom participants on our screens? Okay. The ironic thing is I'd like to, well, not ironic, coincidental, maybe ironic is the correct term. Let's welcome Will back to the team. Nice to have you back, Will. I was going to say the ironic part is I met with Will this week to discuss our agenda and future meetings. And I talked about how in previous meetings, we've moved business from the audience towards the tail of our meetings. And our only audience here this evening is Abigail. Thank you for joining us.
No comments.
So with no business from the audience, we'll just move down our order of events this evening. I was going to speak like a funeral director there for a second, say order of service. I'm sorry. So any agenda additions or corrections?
No, Chair, there is not.
Thank you all. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our August 17th meeting? Going to be moving awfully quick here this evening. I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes as stated in our packet. We have a motion. We have a second. Second. All in favor? Aye. And Will?
Yeah,
I will turn it over to you.
thanks.
Does everyone know Will?
Yeah, just introduce myself to Jeff. But yeah, no, most everyone. Yeah, it's great to be back. Thank you for the welcome. Yeah. Getting into the Heights Streetscape plan, I was here for quite a bit of it, but there's been a lot of work that's been done in the past year and a half that got us to this point today, where we have a preferred design now substantially in the report format and also with an implementation plan. And with that short preface, just quickly hand it over to our MIG project manager, Nathan, to walk you through with the presentation.
Great, thanks, Will. And yeah, it's great to have Will back on the team. And he was an integral part of the kind of getting us started and working on this kind of more comprehensive project. So it's great to have him back and have him in the kind of implementation role or urban rural administrator role. So as a reminder, I'm Nathan Plansky, kind of civil engineer and project manager with MIG, and I'm here with my colleague Roxanne. If you want to turn on your camera and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roxanne Glick with MIG. I'm a landscape architect working with Nathan on this project.
Awesome. Well, thanks. We're excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to kind of go through a presentation and we're going to split partway through to kind of just scroll through relatively quickly the report that was included in the packet, just to kind of walk through kind of format and how that's been set up. So just bear with me here. All right. So here we are, and then this is actually our last check-in with the advisory committee. So, before I forget, I do want to thank all of you for your support and participation throughout this three-phase process. It's been a great process to work with you guys. So thank you. So tonight we are going to, as I mentioned, kind of go through a quick overview of the kind of final preferred concept plan. We're going to introduce some of the new content in the report that we haven't talked about before. It's kind of specifically sort of several different urban design kind of streetscape elements of the final plan. We're hoping that we can kind of get through that in about 15 minutes-ish, and then we'll jump into the implementation plan. We'll talk through kind of the different project types and phasing strategy that we've identified to implement street improvements over time, talk a little bit about where we're headed. There's still some implementation plan work to do on our end, and that's related to kind of considerations for utility infrastructure that we're going to be coordinating with Public Works, funding strategies and costs of street improvements, and then also some of the ODOT and jurisdictional transfer discussion. So just kind of as a quick reminder in terms of where we are in the overall kind of project schedule, we're kind of wrapping up towards the end of our phase 3. As I mentioned, this is the last planned check-in with the URAC, and the idea was to present the draft implementation plan, get some feedback, and see if there are any kind of adjustments that need to be made or considered as we kind of present to the board in a few weeks. And then we'll have one final presentation to the board, kind of scheduled yet to be determined, but we'll be working with Justin and Will on that timing. So kind of jumping into the final report. And so we really see this as sort of a documentation of this kind of three-phase, kind of 2.5-year process that we've been on with the Urban Renewal Agency and with the community in the city. And so it documents that study process. It incorporates a summary and kind of walks through the preferred concept plan for each of the elements along the kind of key corridor streets, 12th and 13th Street and May Street, as well as the key intersections. And then the other kind of, I guess, minor kind of east-west streets that support and complete the Heights District study area. I mentioned some additional urban design elements that are new discussion that we've alluded to that are coming, and we're going to talk about those tonight, and then we'll jump into the implementation plan. I think this next one is a trigger for me to switch my screen. I'm gonna jump over, and hopefully you are all now seeing the cover sheet, and then I'm going to scroll through. And so we've set this report up to kind of be viewed in sort of a side-by-side view. And so that's how I'm going to scroll through this document tonight. So we'll kind of set it up to kind of have our acknowledgements, table of contents. We'll build that out as we finalize this. This is all in draft form. until we get sort of final approval from the board. And so the executive summary will be developed. But they have a brief sort of introduction on the study process, talking through kind of that phase 1 work that was related to the project vision and foundation for the project, public engagement process, highlighting the number of kind of outreach elements and participation that we saw, similar to the for those of you that attended and recall that open house last April. One of the long prints that we had on the table was kind of showing some of the history of work that had been done up to that point. And so what we've tried to do is update and incorporate that project timeline to cover all of the work to date. And so this kind of provides a high level snapshot of some of the key components or steps of the process that we've gone through, and some of the things that will be coming up in terms of transportation system plan update, potential jurisdictional transfer discussions with ODOT, and then future engineering and design and implementation of street improvements in the Heights. The project lays out the community goals that we identified in phase 1, with the 4 priority goals identified here: calm traffic and improve intersections, promote livable community and economy, local identity, and safe, comfortable streets for people, as well as the secondary goals. And we've incorporated a little icon that is recurring throughout the plan to kind of highlight how different design elements of the streetscape plan sort of tie back to these key goals. And so with that sort of as the introduction, we then get into the actual concept plan itself and sort of do a very kind of brief overview. And last time we were here, we shared this graphic with sort of without some of the annotation, but here's that kind of final preferred concept plan. And what we're doing here is just highlighting and introducing some of the key elements that we think align well with those project goals, to sort of inform what this project is about. And so the next several pages walk through the different components, streets and intersections. And so we've laid this out again so that you've got this 2-page view, and you can kind of see 12th Street from May Street at the left to Union, Belmont, and sort of beyond at the right. And so we've laid this out in plan view. We include the typical cross section that we've been talking through over the last few months, and then highlighting key design elements or features, and some kind of precedent or kind of example pictures for those different elements. So it kind of go through the kind of plan view. We've been working on developing some illustrative renderings of a few shots, and so here's sort of a perspective illustration looking at 12th Street, looking south from Taylor Avenue, and sort of what that street might look like in the future. The diagram on the right is one that we looked at, talked about at the last meeting, which I didn't attend with you guys, but Dustin would have walked through. And then we do the same thing going through 13th Street, kind of plan view, see the full plan from May to Belmont, identify those key features, the typical cross section. And kind of go through again here. We've got that new perspective illustration of what a future streetscape looks like on 13th Street with 2-way traffic, kind of medians in places, enhanced crosswalks. And again, that kind of reflects that same plan view graphic that we talked about at our last check-in. From the kind of 2 main street corridors, we jump to key intersections. And so here we're at May and 13th, and kind of the big change there is the roundabout, and a rendering here that kind of shows how that might incorporate into the existing street environment and kind of impacts to adjacent properties, which we know are fairly significant at this location. Again, plan view, some of the precedent images to kind of highlight key features. Same thing at the south end of the Heights. The intersection at 12th, 13th, and Belmont is kind of showing how those intersections are reconfigured, looking at sort of that shared street along Belmont with the street closure between 12th and 13th, and sort of how that might incorporate into the project study area. And then go through kind of finally the east-west streets, May Street, with its typical section, and then kind of go through Taylor Avenue, A, B, and C streets. And so we've really relied on a lot of the graphics that we've been kind of creating throughout this process to create this to be more of a visual document, to inform that kind of future work, and rather than sort of words and sort of restating things that we've been talking about throughout this process that might be documented elsewhere. And then the last kind of, I guess, circulation component or sort of geometric component is that 12th Street bike connection to Pacific Avenue, and sort of what a typical cross section might look like in order to provide a connection to Pacific. So that's a lot of the work that we've been talking about over the last year. That's sort of the graphic format. And then we jump into urban design elements. And I'm going to switch my screen view here quickly, just so it's a little bit easier to see from the single kind of side-by-side view to single page, if it will work. Sorry. All right. So when we get into the urban design elements, one of the first things that we wanted to do is introduce the kind of overall neighborhood character that we've talked about with the community early on, and kind of how the streetscape and the furnishings and plantings and other elements of the street can really inform that feel. And so, from the open house that was held last April of 22, there was one of the big rollout posters that we had asked for people for feedback on different things related to paving materials, placemaking, and kind of the design and atmosphere of the street. And so these are the pictures that people most identified in those topics with kind of the questions that we asked. And so from that, we sort of established a vision for the streetscape character that really builds upon the existing neighborhood character to maintain the authenticity of the heights, creating a consistent and inviting places to connect and gather, both for people, locals in the neighborhood, as well as people that are coming to visit the heights. And then also, the importance of differentiating the heights from downtown, recognizing that it is its own district, it's not similar to downtown, and wanting to have that as sort of a unique and kind of differentiating element compared to the city's other kind of core commercial area. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a second, hand it over to Roxanne, who will talk through the next couple of pages of this.
Yeah, thanks. So starting with street furnishings are a practical element that are an amenity for people, creating a comfortable pedestrian environment. And so in addition, then the style of them helps communicate the overall identity of the neighborhood as well. So we recommend moving forward with future projects, identifying a furnishing family that can be used consistently throughout the neighborhood. And these images here show 3 different examples of how you could have a family of furnishings that all have a similar feel to one another. And the 3 categories we identified that sort of reflect different ways to they all reflect the community vision that we got from the community input. And so sorry, the 3 ways that we could see that potentially going into different styles are the contemporary classic style with more of clean lines and timeless forms and kind of standard colors. And then the contemporary with color style category, that's more bright colors and bolder design. And the next one is the artistically agrarian with more of a modern style that reflects the rural context of Hood River. And then each of these, we have different levels of, it could be all metal benches and seating that are a little lower maintenance, a little higher maintenance, wood and metal combination site furnishings. And then they all include kind of a coordinating bike rack and trash can. Onto the tree palette, we developed kind of a high level potential tree palette as well as a plant palette that really are going to have to be developed further with the future implementation of the projects. But this is really important to have trees in the project. It supports goals of traffic calming, creating identity for the neighborhood, and making a place that people really want to stop and spend time, as well as helping manage stormwater and make a healthier environment for the people in the neighborhood. So to coordinate with the geometry of the plan that Nathan highlighted earlier, we have a few different categories of trees. And so the different groupings here are coordinated with this little map diagram in the corner of where they could fit into the plan. And so the typical street trees are a medium to large canopy tree wherever they can fit, including in the curb extensions. And they're all selected for having different seasonal interests, such as flowers and fall color, and are all regionally appropriate for Hood River as well. And then you have columnar trees that are next to travel lanes so that it stays out of the way of traffic where that's needed. Stormwater trees are specifically for use in green stormwater infrastructure facilities. Smaller trees are some of the constrained spaces in the project, and then the gateway trees are at either end and in these placemaking opportunities where we might have some more space. And on to the shrubs and ground cover. Likewise, to the trees, the planting is helpful in reinforcing the neighborhood identity and creating a welcoming streetscape environment, and then also helping clean water in the stormwater facilities. And we have them grouped into general right-of-way planting, intersection and cycle track planting, and stormwater planting for just where they generally fit into the project, and they'll have to be developed more as projects move into implementation as well. But they're selected for being native or drought tolerant or well suited to Hood River. They're all low maintenance and then include some native plants and pollinator plants. And really importantly, they're all low growing plants that are going to be low maintenance and not need to be pruned in order to stay out of the sight lines of traffic for safety.
Okay, great. Thanks, Roxanne.
Yeah.
So in addition to, or as part of that kind of the planted areas, one of the things that we heard from the community early on are, where are there opportunities to incorporate and kind of opportunities for environmental benefits, stormwater enhancement and treatment. And so one of the things that we wanted to identify as a part of the plan is looking at the space that was available within the proposed streetscape environment and where water is draining today and will be draining in the future. Where are there opportunities to provide green stormwater? And these are green stormwater facilities, are sort of bioretention cells or rain gardens that can treat stormwater runoffs. Polluted stormwater runoff from streets is recognized as one of the biggest contributors to non-source pollution in our local water bodies. And so kind of this provides an opportunity to kind of filter and treat stormwater runoff prior to discharge to the storm drains or to kind of local water bodies such as Indian Creek. And so here we've kind of identified, opportunities for bioretention cells at curb extensions. So this top row of 3 pictures, and kind of identifying the plan where some potential locations are that might be appropriate as the project moves into final design. Where 12th and 13th are realigned, there's an opportunity for potentially a larger green stormwater facility. And then also looking at those placemaking opportunities along Belmont and at that roundabout. Are there opportunities there where there might be some space that can be something that can be a little more interesting and kind of support those placemaking goals? So that's kind of the green stormwater piece. And the last one here is access management. We've talked a little bit about this or alluded to it in previous discussions, but one of the things that in terms of both 12th and 13th. They're looking for ways to improve safety for people walking and biking, and then also sort of improving and supporting kind of the operational traffic flow along 13th Street. And so in blue along 13th Street, there are several blue dots that identify existing driveways, and these are opportunities where those parcels may have access or do have existing access from adjacent east-west streets, whether it be A, B, C, or Taylor, or could have access in the alley in the future. And those are opportunities to potentially remove driveways in the future as properties redevelop or as street improvements go in to improve that safety and operations. And then along 12th Street, there are several red dots that identify existing driveways, again, where there may be opportunities to consolidate multiple driveways to a business or a parcel, or where those parcels could have access from an adjacent side street or kind of a different part of the parcel. And again, and there's one on May Street as well. And these would be opportunities to really look to reduce the conflict points between people biking and people driving. And so that kind of is the update on the kind of urban design elements. And then we get into the implementation. So I'm gonna switch back to the PowerPoint. And maybe I might pause and see if there are any questions from anyone. That I know we went really fast through that content. I know that information was in your packet, but just thought it would be helpful to kind of walk through sort of how we set it up and see if there are any questions. All right, I'll
start over. I wasn't on.
Okay, great.
My question is about the trees that are drawn in kind of as placeholders backed up to the more specific intersection plan views that we just went over. And there are quite a few established trees in the pedestrian right away now, at least right around where Pine Street is. And I wonder if those would be swapped out for where they're drawn, or is that the idea, or would you?
No, I think those are you can actually see it in this rendering. You can kind of see how, where we can preserve and protect, where future projects can preserve and protect existing tree canopy. That's going to be, if they are the right tree and in a good health condition, that's going to have a longer environmental benefit and kind of positive for the streetscape itself rather than planting a new tree. So I think, as design projects move forward, I think it's important to work around and see how those trees can be preserved and protected. And one of the things that we are doing is sort of as part of the implementation plan is developing some design considerations as projects move forward. And I think that'd be a good thing to kind of highlight as an overall goal.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with all of them all up and down the heights, but I know I'm very familiar with the ones on the corner of Pine and 12th. And
yeah,
taking care of them for 12 years now. So it's not like I'm emotional about it, but I could see how some of the improvements would impact those trees, and that might mean they'd have to move or be replaced or whatever.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think something that we can kind of make sure we touch on in the report.
Nathan?
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this at previous meetings. Is right now the time we should think about the continuation of June Street from 12th to 13th? Or should we?
It's a good question. I'll admit I don't recall as much that coming up. I'm gonna flip. Let's see, where's the best way? I'm gonna go back and make sure we're talking about the same place, and I'm gonna scroll up in a map. And what you were talking about is, I know this isn't this spot right here, right? June. And right now it kind of turns into the little driveway through, and then there's a driveway out the other side. That's a good question. I don't recall that coming up. There are significant grades between June, the west end of June and 13th Street. And so I don't know that that's necessarily a great candidate to go through from a impact of properties and some of the other challenges that exist on it. But so we haven't talked about it up till now.
thoughts about that, Jack? I didn't even know that was an option.
I see that property on the west side is for sale right now. It seems like if it's an easement or a street in the city, that this is a time that we should be mindful of that. I think it would have to be, obviously, we've talked about all those roads being directional. I think it would have to be directional westbound, just because
Yeah.
of the traffic pattern coming out of the roundabout, where you would only be able to turn right to go north.
Yeah, and
Back
maybe
as a shortcut to get through that intersection down below. Skip the traffic light and turn north.
it did as we were developing this plan rendering, and I do recall conversations with Dustin. Should we extend? I think this was sort of drawn this way initially, and we hadn't talked about it. And kind of talking with Justin, should we show this too? And he kind of made the comments like, yeah, let's kind of show that. And it may be an opportunity to incorporate it. Maybe there's another space that kind of has this flexible community space that can be created at the north end of the heights, similar to how Belmont could, we're thinking about functioning at the south end. And so that's something that could have some further consideration. Any other kind of questions before we jump into implementation?
Nathan, this is Jeff. First of all, thanks for your presentation. I had a question on page 24 of the plan. It shows a artist rendering of the roundabout at 13th and May. How do the bicycles negotiate this? It looks like the bike lanes come to an end and then they hit concrete or sidewalks. So do you get off your bike and then use one of the crosswalks, or do you then merge into the traffic lane? And
No. So what would happen here is the cycle track continues around and through the roundabout. And so there is, because of one of the, I guess, drawbacks of roundabouts is that there's longer routes of travel for people walking and biking to get around the intersection. But no, that it's a continuous cycle track that goes around the roundabout, and there's a kind of separate, crossing there that's adjacent to the crosswalk for people walking. So it does go through the intersection.
so what about if you're going west on May Street and you come to the roundabout?
Coming west on May Street, you would do the same thing. You would continue up and around and come back down and around. So it's a two-way cycle track. And maybe that's the piece that I didn't say clearly earlier. So it's a two-way cycle track that allows people biking both directions. And you can kind of see at this junction here, there's an opportunity for people that need to go or want to go north down 13th Street, little areas where they can turn out and cross and then come down and connect to bicycle lanes that are down here. And similarly, there's some space up here.
So they're expected to get off their bikes rather than enter the
No.
roundabout.
No, they would continue to stay on the cycle track or on the bike crossing, and then on the south side, there's not a cycle track, would be in the sidewalk, but they wouldn't have to dismount.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, sounds like maybe that's good. I'm gonna jump back now to PowerPoint and implementation plan. So I think the big part, a very important part of this is sort of how does this kind of vision and this preferred street improvement plan get implemented over time. And so what we have done is identified a series of projects that can allow for incremental improvement over time to build towards that vision. We've identified projects that sort of balance the complexity and kind of duration of what these big projects that are going to be at the May Street roundabout and the Belmont intersections at the south end that are going to take a lot of resources and time to work through in terms of permitting, potentially jurisdictional transfer, and construction. And so how to balance that with a desire to get some things built maybe sooner that won't be wasting resources or have to be reworked, but really speak to the need to improve the Heights streets for people walking and biking today. We also are really trying to be thoughtful of how can we do this while minimizing work that has to be redone over time. So there's a variety of project types. We're going to be meeting with Public Works to talk about and understand what the utility needs are long-term in the area, and at least be able to document and sort of provide that brain dump from this process to future projects that get implemented, and then also talk about funding sources. And so with this, we've identified 3 project types. The first are kind of smaller pedestrian and bicycle improvements. And as I mentioned, these are smaller scale things that can executed rather quickly in the near term, while those bigger, maybe higher priority community projects are being developed. And they're really focused on improving neighborhood access and safety. Second are the key circulation projects, and really the kind of the meat of changing the way people travel through the corridor and being able to convert to two-way traffic on 13th Street, improving those key intersections. And all of these are really high community priority projects. And then the third type are kind of what we're calling the fill in the blocks projects. And this is really focused on building out 12th Street. We've talked about, the cross section for that changing. So providing, going from 10-foot to 12-foot sidewalks, adding the two-way cycle track. And so doing that over time, as well as building out the east-west streets to the final cross sections. And so those are things that we see as being phased over time based on communities' priorities and needs. Potentially there are opportunities to partner with private property owners who are redeveloping that sort of initiate and kind of help potentially fund some of those street improvements. And so those are the 3 types of projects. And what I'd like to do is walk through the 11 projects we've identified. And I'm going to start with the key circulation projects, which are sort of all the high community projects. And so the big one here is the roundabout at May Street that we were just talking about, and developing a design and implementing a roundabout here. And the idea is that it would be feasible here to construct that roundabout without converting to two-way traffic. And so that way you can kind of get this piece in. And I know it's a key intersection in terms of concerns for safety, traffic flow. So it checks a lot of those boxes. It's high community priority. On the opposite end, it's a more complex project in terms of impacts to adjacent properties. From a permitting and design standpoint, it's a little more complex. Conversations with ODOT and right off the bat needing to talk about is jurisdictional transfer something that needs to happen or can make the permitting process easier. Then it's also it's a larger project in terms of cost and thinking about kind of identifying the funding sources both for design and construction. That's key project circulation project number 1. Being able to get that in place and kind of work within the existing traffic operations, but then as the second one, how can you go to the other end, the south end of the Heights, and make the improvements at 13th and Belmont and kind of improve that intersection, provide that traffic signal that allows the Heights to be converted into a two-way traffic on 13th. And so this is looking at the 13th and Belmont intersection, the 13th at 12th intersection, 12th and Belmont, excuse me, I'm realizing that my notes there are wrong. And then, or 12th and Union. And then where sort of that realigned intersection at 12th and 13th. So kind of key intersections there to support and facilitate conversion to two-way traffic. But then the other important part of that is the restriping of the existing street and incorporating those medians to provide some of the traffic calming benefits and kind of build that infrastructure out so that it functions the way that's intended. And then any modifications to the roundabout that would be needed from the original implementation there for one-way traffic and then converting it to the two-way, which I think could be fairly modest. And then by changing to two-way traffic, you've now freed up space on 12th Street. And so there's an opportunity in a fairly low cost way to restripe and provide space for that two-way cycle track. And the idea here would be kind of focusing initially on Union Street to Pine and sort of Taylor, but I'll get to that in a second, but sort of focusing on those until you get to the north end and really need some signal improvements to happen at 12th and May. So again, this is another, more complex project. We're talking 3 intersections. There's a fair amount of work to do in terms of striping and kind of infrastructure with medians on 13th. Again, community priority, I think, from some of the things that we've heard, and kind of high cost to implement. The third key circulation project here is that connection to Pacific Avenue for people walking and biking. How to widen the existing road prism, narrow travel lanes, construct that retaining wall, and provide that shared use path so that people can more safely get from Pacific to Union. And again, this is one that will require some ODOT coordination. And I think from what we've heard from our public outreach is that this is a high community priority. And then the fourth key circulation project is building out May Street, so that kind of safe route to school route. And so this would extend improvements that have been completed in theory at the roundabout, and sort of extending that east through the kind of offset intersection at 12th Street. A new or kind of modified traffic signal that would incorporate the bike signals to facilitate safe bike movements on the cycle track through the intersection, both on May Street, but then also connecting to 12th Street. And then with the signal now here, you're able to extend that interim bike condition that I just talked about happening at kind of Pine and Taylor, and taking that all the way north. Now you've got a traffic signal, and you've got a way to move people safely through that intersection. So those are the 4 big key circulation projects. I'm gonna now kind of shift over to kind of 4 kind of smaller pedestrian bicycle projects, and these are things that we could see as being implemented early on if there's support for that, while those more complex kind of key projects are getting underway. So here we talked a lot about how can we get people safely across 12th and 13th Street due to today's traffic configuration and traffic flow. And so through the community process, we identified A Street and Taylor as being important intersections for that east-west traffic. And so this would provide those curb extensions that are consistent with the long-term plan on the west side of the street. Curb extensions, you get kind of rectangular rapid flashing beacons, kind of pedestrian activated push buttons to get people across the street, and then also ADA curb ramps on the east side of the street. So these are sort of smaller scale retrofits that can go in and can happen. I think we were thinking that this is kind of a medium priority in terms of community priority to kind of get people safely across 13th Street. Similarly, the second sort of pedestrian bicycle project is the Taylor Avenue neighborhood connection. And so this is sort of building on that first step that gets people across 13th, but can we rebuild Taylor, new sidewalks, and that two-way cycle track, kind of rebuild that street out to facilitate that full east-west movement along the Pine to Taylor connection. One of the challenges becomes, how do you kind of transition from the east edge of Taylor over to Pine? And I think really taking a page out of the demonstration project that was done a few years back, and sort of, how can we temporarily and in an interim condition, make some adjustments to the traffic on 12th Street, shifting lanes over, potentially removing some parking to kind of keep 2 lanes of traffic in the near term, but allow space for that connection between Pine and Taylor. And again, I think this sort of, based on feedback, feels like a high community priority project. And the third pedestrian bicycle project is going in and retrofitting the sidewalk along the east side of 13th from Taylor down to just north of Belmont. And the idea here is to create a safe, comfortable walking environment and to prepare 13th for that transition to two-way traffic when the Belmont intersection is complete. One of the things when this gets converted to two-way traffic, we've talked about that travel lane in the northbound direction is right along the curb line. And so that cross section was designed to have a planting strip that separates the sidewalk from the roadway with kind of the columnar street trees that Roxanne mentioned. That's kind of one of the strategies for trees. And so we want to get this in place prior to that conversion. So it's a more comfortable place when that transition happens. And then also in terms of access management, how can we work with adjacent property owners and business owners to remove some driveways along 13th Street and have access come from adjacent side streets or the alleys to support traffic flow and improve safety along 13th Street. So those are the kind of smaller pedestrian bicycle focused projects that could potentially happen a little bit sooner. And then the remaining 4 are these fill in the block projects. And so the first of these is building out 12th Street from Belmont to Pine. Actually, I should say Belmont to Taylor, I apologize. And so the idea here is you've got 4 blocks and 6 intersections along here. And so over time, as sort of community and city priorities are kind of sequence these things, kind of build these blocks and intersections, 1 or 2, or maybe it's even 3 at a time, but sort of build that out, moving your curb line out a couple of feet to get the wider sidewalks, building in your two-way cycle track. And doing that in a way where you can kind of build over time and try to minimize the rework and also provide safe transitions. And so that similar to the two-way bike conversion that had kind of the interim condition cycle track that went from Union to Taylor is sort of, we're separating out 12th Street between Union and Taylor, kind of recognizing that getting that cycle track in sooner to provide that safe route to school connection all the way up to the Pine to Taylor seemed like a good sort of stopping point. And then sort of the north end of that is the remaining 2 blocks to the north of Taylor and the 1 intersection to kind of really take those sidewalk improvements and the cycle track all the way to the north end. And again, it's really driven in our mind by where those kind of priorities are from the community, the urban renewal agency in the city. And some of this may be informed by infrastructure and utility needs that, there's a water or a sewer main that has to be replaced, and maybe that drives some of that. And that's what we're going to be talking with Public Works about in the coming week. The third one is kind of the shared street on Belmont. This is one that could very easily become part of the key circulation project that's happening with the kind of redesign of the intersections and converting to two-way traffic, but recognizing that that's a fairly meaningful and large project on its own. We saw this as potentially being a separate project. I think this also is going to want some additional outreach process to go through to kind of identify what the design is, and it might make sense to separate that out from the other, but it could happen as part of improvements on the Belmont intersections, but it does have to happen after that because Belmont needs to be closed, and really see this as being sort of a full right-of-way reconstruction to create that community space. And then I think that's, lastly is kind of the build out of A, B, and C streets in the future, sort of phased reconstruction of these remaining 3 blocks and 2 intersections, new sidewalks and streetscape improvements. And again, really see these as being informed by a lot of different things, whether it be redevelopment, community priorities, and kind of as funding allows. So that's the kind of how we've broken down the full plan into what we think are kind of hopefully more kind of incrementable and manageable projects for the city to pursue in the future. I've mentioned a couple times, we are taking a look at existing utilities, and I know that was one of the early urban renewal plan goals is addressing some of the utility infrastructure. So this is just a PDF that we've been tracking. Down in the bottom right, this is the excerpt from the urban renewal plan and identified several utility projects. We've tried to map out where those are. In blue are planned city capital improvement projects. And so the city is planning to replace water, sewer, storm drains in different locations. So we're going to be talking with Public Works next week to identify where those improvements are needed and want to be able to kind of carry that forward as a part of this implementation plan. And the kind of last piece here is funding opportunities. And what we are doing is sort of compiling and kind of doing some research to identify what are the potential funding sources out there. For Will, as sort of the administrator, where can we be looking to fund these projects in the future? And so from a federal and an ODOT grant program standpoint, safe routes to school programs are great. Kind of talked a little bit about jurisdictional transfer. There's an opportunity there to bring the ODOT contributing financially to address existing deficiencies in the roadway, and jurisdictional transfer weren't an option. There may be other funding partnerships with ODOT. At a local level, urban renewal district grant funds, city funds from the general fund down to each of the utilities and the road fund, debt financing or general obligation bonds, a local improvement or business and district improvement district could be appropriate here, local business district, additional street and utility fee or transportation system development charges, and that could occur as a part of the transportation system plan. I mentioned developer-led redevelopments. There might be opportunities as properties redevelop over time, or if they have to provide a fee in lieu of doing street improvements, maybe it's more appropriate to take that money and put in a bucket to aggregate that over multiple projects to support an implementation. Franchise utilities. There are existing franchise utilities that run along the overhead power poles, and depending on the existing easement agreements that they have with the city or ODOT in this condition, there may be some kind of opportunities for costs to be provided from them, at least to relocate their utilities, or they bear the costs of that. And then, particularly, and maybe only for the Pacific Avenue bike connection, but can we look for other sources like the Hood River Valley Park and Rec as a kind of funding source or grant opportunity? So what we're envisioning is sort of creating a matrix of these funding sources and the 11 projects to help kind of guide where to look for the Urban Renewal Agency and Will as the administrator in the future to identify funding sources. And then ODOT comment. So the city has received a formal letter and kind of review and feedback from the state DOT on in response to the preferred plan that was shared with them. It's consistent with the feedback that we've gotten throughout the process. It identifies, some of the design deviations that would be needed from the highway design manual standards. If the streets and intersections were to be maintained under ODOT jurisdiction, one of the things this letter does do is it does recommend starting a jurisdictional transfer process. The city's interested and they support that process. One of the things that, and Will can probably talk a little bit more about this, but the kind of transfer process will take time. And so as an early step, one of the things that will need to happen is sort of identify what the condition and sort of do an assessment of the existing roadway to understand, what ODOT's contribution is if the city were to take over jurisdiction of the roadway. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and kind of turn it over to all of you. And I think one of the big questions that we're interested in kind of providing feedback to the board and kind of to help inform this is, what projects based on the way we've organized it, do you think should be prioritized? And Will, I don't know if there's anything else, Will, that you wanted to add on kind of the ODOT or jurisdictional transfer, I guess and kind of now might be a good time also, or we can just jump into comments and questions.
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Yeah, just know I won't get us too deep into that because we could talk for quite a long time, but just know that we have already reached out to ODOT to set up a scoping meeting to hear from them. Yeah, what does a condition assessment look like to them, and get plugged into all the right points of contacts. That is happening right now, so that we'll be able to hit the ground running. Should we really want to engage with this once the Heights plan is adopted. So just know that's on deck, and we're already getting our ducks in a row. And then just kind of wanted to also set the frame kind of the discussion for today, about kind of where we are and what we're looking for feedback. This plan should pretty much be in its final form with all of the input that has been received to date. But this is a kind of final chance to take one last bite of the apple, to provide any recommendations or any comments to the Urban Renewal Agency Board when they review this same document on November 13th. So just with that, yeah, we'll answer any questions and also take any feedback that you have.
Well, there's been some discussion, and I'm not that familiar with these jurisdictional transfer. Would ODOT actually give the city money then?
Possibly, yeah. So we did a jurisdictional transfer in 2020 for Oak Street. That's why there are the seating areas in the right of way. We needed a jurisdictional transfer in order to make that happen. That took about 6 to 8 months. And didn't include any funds, but did include a commitment that ODOT would bring all of these ramps up to ADA compliance. So that's kind of how quickly it can go. I'll just caution that the 82nd Avenue jurisdictional transfer in Portland that just wrapped up, that was about 4 years and included a significant contribution from ODOT. And also using some federal funds to kind of all make the deal go through. And similarly, Tigard is pursuing jurisdictional transfer to Hall Boulevard right now. That's been about 3 years in the making and has been held up on trying to negotiate funds from ODOT. So all that is to say that when we get the lay of the land, one thing we want to shoot for is getting funds from ODOT commensurate with bringing the district up to what would be called a state of good repair. But those negotiations lengthen out the process of jurisdictional transfer quite a bit. But in the end, it results in the city being not the owner because it's right away, but the in jurisdictional control of the roadway.
And so is the concept to bring it up to some standard or to cover future maintenance costs, or
Yeah.
what's the thinking behind that?
Yeah.
I'm not objecting, I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's multiple components of it. So one is just the state of good repair standard. So that's just looking at what is it now versus what would it be if there wasn't a bunch of deferred maintenance on it, and getting cost estimates of what it would take to bring it to that level. So that's a dollar amount. Then you also could look at what are planned improvements over and above just being in a state of good repair. And so we would look at the State Transportation Improvement Program, their STIP, and say, oh, you were already planning on doing this. You're not going to have to do that anymore because we're taking over the roadway. So you should give us that money too. And then there's also taking over any liability that they may have. For instance, they are liable right now to make all sidewalks along state highways ADA accessible. So we'd also want to get that component of money. So all of these they kind of stack on each other and they all become negotiating, chips, so to speak. But it's, then we also have considerations of we want to move forward quickly and we don't want to be in negotiations for years and years and years. So it's going to be, quite the dance probably.
And one thing just to add in terms of the why, right now, any kind of design approvals need to go through ODOT. And there are some things that in terms of, highway design manual standards or ODOT design standards have less flexibility. then AASHTO standards, or that the city standards would be able to apply using kind of the AASHTO, which is the American Association of State and Highway Transportation Officials. And so basically sort of allowing more flexibility in the design, removing some of the permitting red tape and the time that it would take to go through that process. Those are also benefits of being able to kind of do wanting to do a jurisdictional transfer to sort of facilitate future improvements.
Well, the question, the jurisdictional transfer, everything that we're talking about right now is just made to Union, but the scope of our project is from Oak to Brookside.
For the entire Heights District? Yeah, I think we would want to as narrowly define the jurisdictional transfer as possible. So maybe something like just north of Pacific to just south of Cascade. But defining the boundaries is definitely one of the first steps and something we haven't done yet.
And I would add, and this was part about us letter, it would still be signed from a wayfinding standpoint as State Highway 281, but the kind of jurisdictional ownership of it would become the city's. So people would still see it on a map as 281.
And then another question that I have is, before the URA meeting on November 13th, are you looking for a recommendation from the advisory council here tonight to accept this plan as it's shown, or have we kind of done that already?
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, we don't have any big left turns here at this stage in the planning process, but looking for a motion either supporting the preferred design and implementation plan as presented, or making any specific comments or recommendations that you want the Urban Renewal Agency board to consider when they look at this.
I have not any other conversation with Nathan.
I have one more. This is for Nathan and Dustin and Will, Abigail, and everybody involved with this. The clarity of this presentation is incredible. It's nice to see the whole of it broken out into steps, and I think that's absolutely valuable for us and for the city council as well, and for the community as well, to see like, these are weighted more heavily for this for this. There's so many steps. It makes it much more tangible for me. I suspect everybody else. So I would be commended on the clarity of this. And it's an awful lot of information, but it's presented very well. Thanks.
Well, one piece that I think we mentioned, but right now there's placeholders in there for cost. One of the things we are doing, we've talked about the cost for the build out of these kind of street and intersection improvements. We do plan to, as a part of that plan that goes to the board, kind of the draft implementation plan on the board in a few weeks, will include project costs. That's something we're sort of still working through, but that's one piece that's in process here.
I had one comment on the prioritization. It's slide 42. Oh, that's up on the screen. Sorry. I cross this area a lot on foot, and the cross streets on 13th at Taylor in particular, I think is one of the riskiest. You've got cars that are accelerating as they're coming up from May, and you have an uphill grade exactly where the pointer is. So the cars are accelerating as they're coming up that hill. And in combination, because it's a hill that's cresting, there's not a long vision clearance. And so cars are coming up on that crosswalk pretty quick and pretty fast. So my personal opinion is that should be a priority, a high priority. And it seems like it may be, what's the phrase, a low hanging fruit? I mean, it can't be a lot in terms of cost. It seems like it would be relatively inexpensive. So other than that one comment, I agree with Clint's comment. The plan's well drafted. It seems to accurately portray the process and the preferred design. It's easy to read, and so I think it's a really well done draft. I support it.
I would entertain a motion to recommend the plan as shared with us this evening to the URA.
I move that we recommend it as presented to us tonight.
And I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, Nathan.
Yeah, thank you
It is
guys.
nice to see this plan come together as it is stated. So accolades to you and your team.
Thanks. Yeah, and a big hand to Roxanne. She's been doing a lot of the work behind the scenes to make it as presentable as it is. So thanks.
Will, do you want to take over or continue with the next steps?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So again, thank you for the warm welcome. I'm so happy to be back with the city and that this position of a dedicated urban renewal administrator was created. I've been meeting with Urban Renewal Agency board members. And as I think through all of the projects that are slated for this position over the next 2 years that were identified in the budget, and I've been working on sequencing and thinking about what comes first, and thought it would be helpful to create a 6-month work plan to communicate out to everyone, set expectations, and know kind of have there be in the vein of no surprises, kind of what's coming up. So this is a working draft that's on page 51 of your packet. Just has by district, some of the more major projects, and then with a kind of rough Gantt chart of when the work would occur. So be happy to kind of run through these. What I'm looking for is comments, questions, head nods. Is there any of this that's shocking? Do you see any blind spots? So real quickly, but I'll be happy to dig in more deeply if there's questions. With Columbia Cascade, be working to revisit the 2019 parking study recommendations and seeing which one of those we can be making progress on. Continuing to just monitor and fund the existing projects that Public Works is already working on. That's Second and Oak signalization, and then also the stormwater enhancement projects, and then also they'll be putting in select new garbage cans and some tree replacements. So we don't really have a too active hand in that, mostly just the checkbook. But then I think what is the bigger question is, as I've been talking to folks, I said we have approved these things kind of one at a time, but there is, the district is at the end of its lifespan, and it would be nice to have one single conversation where we look at the $4.2 million that we have, all the projects that remain to potentially be done, and consider them all at once and have kind of a deliberate closeout resolution, similar to what we had in the waterfront, where we passed a resolution saying all that's left is going to the waterfront storm line over there. So that's Columbia Cascade. In the waterfront, very, very similar, just watching and monitoring the project and funding the stormwater line as we move through the various phases down there. Heights kind of is picking up where we're leaving off with getting the Heights streetscape plan finalized and adopted. Some of the very next steps will be adding the streetscape plan into the transportation system plan, then also doing a minor amendment to the Heights urban renewal plan, basically noting that anything that's in the Heights streetscape plan as adopted is hereby a qualified expenditure and an approved plan in the urban renewal plan. Exploring the jurisdictional transfer with ODOT, and then as much as possible implementing those first small projects, including that the safety enhancements on 13th and Taylor would be one of the first ones. Moving into the new West Side District, major, effort. Maximum indebtedness, roughly a little over 3 times more than all the rest of the districts put together. Now has been adopted, paperwork filed with the county assessor, and it will start to collect tax increment next about a year from now. So we have first up to bat is to develop the 5-year action plan. That's part of our existing contract with Elaine Howard and Echo Northwest. And some of the items that kind of are bubbling up on the list are to do a constructability analysis of the West Side District, kind of inform where are those missing holes that are really locking up the development potential of the west side. Develop an SDC credit or waiver program. This was something that was specifically recommended by the 2022 affordable housing strategy of using the West Side District to be able to incentivize capital A affordable housing, but also looking at maybe missing middle housing that otherwise can't be done economically, and is there any room for incentives to kind of break a log jam up there, get some more modest housing types built, and then also building up those key district performance and equity measures, ensuring that as we invest these millions of dollars to build new infrastructure, new parks, new trails, that we don't displace and push people out. And so we want to have some predefined measures to kind of track, are we doing a good job? Are we straying from that overall goal? Which is really why there's the big housing component as part of the West Side. And then also something that will probably end up taking a fair bit of attention in the upcoming months, is we just know that there's a developer with their eye on the Stonehenge property who will be wanting to put in over 150 units, a good portion of which would be affordable to the 80 to 100% area median income. We don't have any ask on that yet. The purchaser is still going through site due diligence, but we may have something to consider as far as a development agreement on the horizon. And then lastly, just getting into the bureaucratic administrative piece of urban renewal, looking at agency governance and bylaws. In 2012, right after the Heights was created, the Urban Renewal Board reformulated, actually created the Urban Renewal Advisory Committee at that time. And also we have the bylaws just of how the city and the county, or city and the agency interact as far as cost sharing. So that was something that we could say, look at with the phasing out of 2 of our districts and the creation of this new, very large district on the west side, seeing if that's something that we want to talk about. And then finally, issuing annual report that's more operational. I might take that out. But then also just kind of wanted to look at, is there an opportunity for us to bring in some grant funded additional help in the summer to help add some even more horsepower to this agency. So with that kind of quick run through, anything surprising, anything needs to be added, any comments that you would like to make to the Urban Renewal Agency board?
I know it's not part of the West Side plan, but do we have a scheduled date of completion of the Rand intersection?
Oh, not off the top of my head. I don't know if, do you know
Another year.
anything?
And then what about Columbia Cascade project with the intersection of the new stoplight here? Another year as well?
Construction will start in February, and I think it's, they're hoping to get most of it done by Memorial Day, take a pause in the summer, and then finish up in the fall. That one is a much more aggressive schedule, but also a much easier project.
And well, thank you for the 6-month plan. I like that. That gives. I mean, we have a lot of information here specifically with the Heights plan that is going to move much slower than 6 months. So it's kind of nice to have that forecast.
Yeah.
Any other items?
No.
Any items from members here?
Well, I just had one question on the implementation of the Heights plan. We need the streetscape plan to get adopted before we can start drawing funds, or how does that work?
Sure. Yeah, the Heights Urban Renewal Plan sets out a list of funded projects and also goals. So really, I think we probably could get moving because a lot of these projects fit into stated goals of the district already. But I think it's good, just good house cleaning. It's good just maintenance of the project to just incorporate this Heights streetscape as an appendix and incorporate it formally into the Heights Urban Renewal Plan itself. Memorializes it, really sets a strong policy intention if we do that.
This is a difficult question. Our plan, which we have, and our maximum indebtedness, which we have, our plan now shows 4 properties. 3 in Roundabout and 1 up over on Union and Belmont. I hate the word value engineer, or what is your knee-jerk reaction? Are we going to be able to afford this with our maximum indebtedness without the help of jurisdictional transfer and other funding mechanisms?
Yeah, thank you. It's really good to level set expectations on that. The remaining maximum indebtedness isn't even enough to get the roundabout done, let alone the entire plan as identified in this Heights streetscape. So really what urban renewal is going to need to be is that kind of catalytic initial investment to bring in matching funds so we can go solicit partners. And that's the work that's going to need to happen over the next year. Well, really through the entire implementation period, we'll probably be constantly looking for external sources of funds.
When do we request bids?
Yeah, well, I think we first, those first steps as incorporating into the TSP, that is a requirement that must be done. The incorporating into the Heights Urban Renewal Plan is highly recommended, but we need to get it in the transportation system plan first before we can start getting permits and bidding it out. Jurisdictional transfer may also be a required first step. That's still to be determined, but kind of both of those things are ahead of putting out bids.
Again, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other items from the members? Good meeting tonight.
Yeah.
So if there's no other items, I'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting.